Riverhook is a year-round educational series that showcases the 12-acre Hester Herring Cason Preserve in Upper Nyack. Programs will celebrate the arts, environment, education, and innovation. During this time of heightened public safety precautions, our workshops are limited to a small audience and videotaped by Flying Films New York for rebroadcast. Future topics will explore beekeeping, bat habitats, soil reclamation, and public sculpture. Video productions for this series have been made possible through a gift from the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust. This Experience Riverhook program is sponsored by Friends of Riverhook, Nyack Library, and the Friends of Rockland Lake and Hook Mountain. We are so proud to welcome as our inaugural Experience Riverhook presenter, Bob Stien. Many have come to know Bob, who has lived with his wife, Enid Wisehouse, in Upper Nyack for the last 25 years, as a person constantly sharing his knowledge and passion for our natural environment. Bob has led outdoor education programs for the 92nd Street Y, for camps at the Marydell Faith and Life Center in Boulder, Colorado, and elsewhere. Bob is president and owner of Acme Exterminating Corporation. He has two daughters, Gabriella and Selena, who both graduated from Nyack High School. Bob serves on the board of the Friends of Rockland Lake and Hook Mountain and was on the advisory board of Marydell Faith and Life Center in Upper Nyack for many years. Bob is one of the founders of the New York Fathering Conference. This annual conference had 350 attendees when it was first held in April 2015 at the Westchester County Center. He has organized and led workshops for fathers in Michigan's Fathers Conference, the 92nd Street Y, and in several other settings. He has been a facilitator for epic fathering programs in Rockland County, and Bob was on the board of a national nonprofit, Dads and Daughters, for several years. After the video, which is 28 minutes in length, Bob will be available for questions and answers. We are also joined this evening by the president of the Friends of Riverhook, Paul Curley, and his board colleague, Allison Crowther, who is the founder of the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust. And now, let's learn about the art and science of maple tree tapping while we experience Riverhook.
First say welcome to Riverhook in Upper Nyack. I'm gonna take my mask off, though I always keep it on, and I'm glad that everyone else here does, but for this program, for the filming, I'm far enough away from everyone. I don't think anyone's closer than 10 or 12 feet away. And so is everyone comfortable with me this far away? Good, thank you. So I'm gonna just tell you that my name is Bob Stien. I live in Upper Nyack. I can almost see my house from here, just around the corner. A very close friend of mine who owns a camp called the Nature Place in Chestnut Ridge was sort of my mentor the first when I started doing it. We're going to talk about how we tap maple trees and from the sap that we take from the trees. I have always thought, and I always felt that there's something about making maple syrup and tapping maple trees. It's really magical. The very thought that you can just walk up to a tree, drill a small hole in it, hang a bucket, and then have something incredibly healthy and tasty is just wonderful. I really, before my daughters were born, I used to go up to Vermont or New Hampshire, and I'd look for what are called sugar shacks, these little huts that have the roof cut open, the peak is cut open, because what they're doing is boiling the sap, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Right now, I first want to say, how do you think I figure out what tree to tap? What do you think?
Maybe leaves, but in the winter maybe there's like, I'm not sure.
That's a very good answer. You said leaves.
Yeah.
But in the winter, I'm kind of out of luck. Where are the leaves?
On the ground.
They're not here right now. So that's a very good answer and a very good way to identify trees, but it wouldn't help us today. Yes?
Is it like Steamer that said that, but is it like the bark?
That's an excellent answer. That's right. That's exactly one of the things that I look at. I look at this tree when I walk through, you know, we walk through all the time. We love it here. I can just look over and I know that this is a sugar maple. There are many different maples, by the way, that we can tap. We can tap sugar maple, which is the best, and I'll tell you why later. But also you can use the sap from red or swamp maple, from Norway maple, which is an invasive, but it works for giving you sap and syrup, and also silver maple even. And some others. Out west in Washington State, they actually can make it, not like we do in the Northeast, but they use what's called big leaf maple, and they can still do the same thing. So what we do is once we've identified the tree with the leaves, and some people do that if they want to do this next year and they're not sure about the bark or other things I'm going to tell you about, they'll walk through in the year, time of the year when the leaves are up, and they'll mark the tree to make sure they're tapping the right tree. So the bark is one way. Any other way, there are a couple of other ways that I can tell just by looking up at this tree right now. I know this is another clue that I'm getting. It's the branch pattern. If I look right here, I'm not tall, but not 6 feet doesn't quite do it. You can see that it's called an opposite pattern. As I look at the branches, where I see the branches, and just like my arms are on either side of my torso, it's an opposite pattern versus alternate. Alternate is like one branch on this side and then the other one on that side and back and forth. It's called alternate, an alternate pattern. Now this isn't the only tree that has opposite branches, but you can see as you look up throughout the branches, there's that opposite pattern in many areas. So the leaves, the bark, the branch pattern, and I can just look at the overall shape of the way the branches are, because after more than a couple of decades I've done this, I can look and see certain trees, and the term that's used is that people will say that a maple has a beautiful crown. It's in the middle of an open field. It's not crowded around a lot of other trees, and it has a beautiful crown to it when the leaves are on. So that's how we identify the tree. What we then do is we drill a hole in the tree. When we want to get sap, we're going to talk about how we get sap and then make maple syrup. This is, an old brace and bit, it's called. And you go to the tree and you look for a good spot where you're going to drill a hole. You could usually start on the south side of the tree because the sun hits the tree on that side of the tree. That's where the sun hits the tree first, and it's more likely to flow on that side earlier in the day. But year after year, you have to keep moving the hole. You don't use the same hole. You can never do that. You have to move about 5 inches away the next year. And so you can go around the tree. If you look at the trees by my house, they're all around, but they're closed up. I say it sounds kind of silly or funny almost, but the holes that I've drilled over the last couple of years, they kind of look like a belly button because they start to close up. So this hole that's no longer a hole starts to close up, and the tree really isn't hurt. No more than, if you had a little scratch on your hand or something and it would then heal, you'd put a Band-Aid on it. We don't use Band-Aids here. We just take the spout out, and that's what these are. And then the hole starts to close up, and the tree, heals just like we would with a small scratch. Once we drill the hole, we put these in. I have many different ones here. These are called spouts or spiles. That's what we use to tap the tree. So once we drill a hole, we then go over with, we're going to do this a little later. We take our hammer and we tap the spout or spile into that hole, and it will start to drip. And we're going to be lucky today, I think. I can never guarantee that with Mother Nature. In the great outdoors, you don't always know exactly what will be. But I think we're going to get some sap coming out of some of these taps. What I've done, I have quite a few of them. Some of them are almost like antiques. They're quite old. I'm always learning. I love to learn about these things. So I don't always have all the answers. Of course I don't. Things are always changing. There's a place in Vermont they're my go-to people. It's called the Maple Syrup Research Center in Proctor, Vermont. And I call them and I learn new things that they're learning. And one thing I learned, I mean, I have a ton of these old spouts because I won't use them anymore. What they discovered not so many years ago is that I used to drill a hole with my drill that was 7/16. That was the size for most of these spouts. But they discovered that if you make a hole that's much smaller, it works just as well. So why wouldn't I do something that's less harmful to the tree, that's less invasive? And so I now drill, this is a 5/16 hole, and we'll drill that a little later. What they actually do commercially, I'm what's called, I think in the maple syrup world, a hobbyist. This isn't what pays my mortgage. This isn't what I do for a living. I love to do this, and I've been running these programs at the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan. Busloads of people used to come up, and most years I run it over at the base of Hook Mountain there at Marydale, but during pandemic time we don't do that with big groups. So we'll drill a hole, we'll put this spout in, we'll then hang a bucket, and hobbyists like me still uses buckets. If you were to go up to Vermont, they use surgical tubing, believe it or not. They discover it's a lot of work. Can you imagine? You know, I get up in the morning and I'm walking from bucket to bucket, emptying it, and then I, collect it here and I share it with friends, and we boil a little bit still. But they actually use surgical tubing, so they don't have to empty buckets. They let gravity do the work. The tubing runs downhill, and so they'll have a big vat at the bottom of there. It's called a sugar bush. That's where all the trees are. When there's a great big area with a lot of sugar maples, it's a sugar bush where all those trees are, and then all the tubing runs downhill into this big vat. What they do with it then is they boil it. That's what I do on a smaller scale. If you were to go into a sugar house, say in Vermont or New Hampshire, upstate New York, it's a small structure, and they have these enormous pans, much, much bigger than this table. And they have a big fire underneath it. And what they're doing is they're removing the water. That's really what you're doing. This here, sap, is to be made into syrup, has to be boiled. And does anyone know how many gallons it takes of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup? It's about 40. So it's about 40 gallons of sap makes 1 gallon of syrup. That's what it takes. And that's why it's expensive. If you go to a supermarket, this is kind of, it's like Vermont sugar-free, blah, blah, blah. It's corn syrup. It's very inexpensive, and it's just manufactured. It's not coming from a tree like that. It's corn syrup and sugar and other things. What I do actually now, if you were to go to our house in a couple of weeks and open our freezer, you'd look in and it would be nothing but a wall of containers that are maple sap. What people do, and have started to do for some time now, but it's more popular here now, is they actually drink the sap itself. Maple sap. I bought this, truthfully, one of these here at Fairway before it closed in the last few years. But they sell this online and at supermarkets. Yeah, one friend of mine calls it Mother Nature's version of Gatorade. It's extremely healthy. It's all full of antioxidants, magnesium, potassium, all these different minerals. So it's really very healthy and very good for you. Someone actually decided to make some money they took sap, they carbonated it, and there's maple sap soda. Sap maple soda, yep. So that's, one thing to tell you about that. And I make smoothies every day, which is, you see in our house, I take a quart container out of the freezer, put it in the sink the night before, it thaws out, and it lasts me many months. Well into the year, I'm still making my maple sap smoothies. It's very good for you. This here is a mold. What's that? What do you think that shape is?
A maple leaf?
That's right. That's just what it is. And if you go into some of the stores in some of the areas that I mentioned, they'll sell this. This is, a maple leaf candy. That's right. That's just what that is. I've done that a few times, but it's all about temperature. When you're boiling the sap, you're supposed to bring it to a certain temperature in order for it to not get too thick, because a few times, here's an example of when I went too far, it crystallized in the bottle. Try and get that out. It might be interesting. You have to stop at a certain point where the sap is thick enough. This is a very important point to make. When you take this little bit of sap home, drink it today or tomorrow, or boil it if you want, or freeze it. But there's natural bacteria in here that will actually start to break down the sugar pretty quickly. So within a couple of days, it won't taste quite as good. You can still, I drink it 3, 4, 5 days later, but in the first day or two, that's why these commercial maple syrup makers, they boil everything right away. Comes out of the tree, buckets, tubes, whatever they're using, they're boiling it immediately because they don't want to lose that sugar content. I should also tell you, though we're talking about maple today, you can use many other trees. You know, I started tapping black birch trees, and it's totally different. It takes 80 to 100 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of birch syrup. And if you went up in the Catskills, someone sells it for, it's quite expensive. They do a lot of it in Alaska because birch trees are usually when it's colder. Most of the, in this country, there are more areas that where you can make sap than most realize. It's not just Vermont, New Hampshire, it's also Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, all the way out to Ohio. You can, you know, I'm sure I missed a few states. Those are all areas where there's maple, and it's below freezing at night and above freezing in the day. That's what you have to have. If that's not present, sometimes I'll go out to the bucket. I call them sapsicles. It's too cold. It was a little bit dripping, and off the end of the spout, you just see it looks like an icicle, but it's sap. It just has, it has to be above freezing day and below freezing night, or it just doesn't work. And it will literally, like a faucet almost, just go off and on, depending upon the temperature. How long can you do this? Well, you have to have, it's dictated by temperature. People often ask, when can you do it? And they won't start in Quebec, which is where most of it in the world is made. They make, I think, over 85% of the world's production of maple syrup is from Quebec, not Vermont, New Hampshire, and so on. There, it's a much bigger industry, big business. So those are the areas where you can do it. And because it's colder up there, they're going to start later. I must stop when making taking the sap when it's no longer clear. What happens is the sap becomes, it's called buddy sap. And if I walk over to the bucket and I look in there, I go, oh, that's it. I look up and I can see the buds coming on the tree. I take the bucket and I dump it out. If you went to drink that, you would not be a happy camper. It doesn't taste good. This is the buddy sap. Yes?
Is it, does maple syrup taste the same to other kinds of syrup a little?
Maple syrup has, they each have, it's a good question. You know, what is maple syrup like compared to other syrups? Birch syrup is very different. It's not even that sweet. A lot of chefs like really prize it. It has a very interesting, I have a small bottle. Frankly, I never bothered to boil that down. I bought it when I was up in Montreal, in Quebec. I just drink the birch sap, but it's quite different. And you can use sycamore, you can use walnut. There are several, besides the birch, there's a few other trees. There's a couple of other ones. The tree has to be at least 10 or 12 inches across. It's just not strong enough and big enough to give you sap. So it's got to be at least that big in order to do this. Where did we learn this? How did we learn to do this? Anyone have any ideas? Good. Long before people were Googling, there are other ways that we got information. What do you think?
Well, like maybe the Native Americans used to do it?
The Native Americans are the ones that taught us. That's right. When the colonists came here, they arrived. They didn't know how to do this. And the Native Americans were making syrup using the sap as, you know, I boiled pasta in it at times, but I have a lot of it. Sometimes I get 20 gallons in a day. And I share it with friends, but I have a lot of it. So we really have much to thank the Native Americans for. They taught us a great deal, and they taught us how to do this. There's something else I should mention is that there are different darknesses, there are different colors when it comes to maple syrup. And the reason for that is that at the very beginning of the run, when it first starts to run, if you boil the sap right at the very beginning, you get what's called, in some areas, grade A or fancy. It's very light in color. It's almost like a beigeish color. It's not dark at all, and it's a more delicate taste. And as you get further into the season, before you get to buddy sap, it's really looks almost like molasses. It's very dark, a very dark color, and a much stronger color. In some much darker color. In some areas, they're not allowed to sell it, you know, in the bottles. They're only allowed to sell it to bakeries for muffins and so on. I like the stronger flavor. It's a matter, you know, it's a matter of, you know, preference and personal taste. But that is how you'll get it. That's why you do have the different shades, you know, and colors. Does anyone have any other questions right now?
So is there anything else you have to do besides boil it? You don't add anything to the sap?
Absolutely not. No, you just boil it. But if you do get a bunch of sap, watch it. Have I ruined a few pots? Yeah, my wife didn't have to think about that very long. You know, when you boil it, you really have to catch the right moment. It's not time to go out and go for a walk. You know, when it starts to come up and it'll get it starts to foam up and gets so close to the top, then you need to turn it down and not let it go over the top.
Do you know how, how sap comes out of the tree?
How it comes out?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. What's happening basically, like if you were to go and do this, you know, at the end of December or in the middle of January when it was really, really cold, you'd have a hole in the tree, but you wouldn't have any sap. It's a very good question. I'm so glad you asked that. What's happening, it's almost like the tree is getting ready for spring. So the sap, as it comes up through the tree, is basically preparing the tree for warm weather to produce the buds, to produce the leaves. It's the energy that's been stored all through the warm months of the year when the leaves are on the tree and the tree is, you know, it's photosynthesis is called, where it's converting CO2 to oxygen and doing all it does, all the trees do. The sap is like it's energy that it's pulling up through the tree to get ready for the buds and the leaves in the spring to start to become an active tree that's growing again. It's almost like the tree goes to sleep for the winter a bit, and then once again is going to get its sap through the tree, coming up through the tree to.
How old is this tree? About.
How old do you think it is?
200, 100, 200 years old.
That's a good guess. This is a big tree. I know that, you know, there's many books and all kinds of material on these things. And I have a picture of a tree that had a name for it. It was in Vermont. This maple tree was 400 years old. I think it died not so many years ago, but it was 400 years old.
Can you tell them how you can tell how old a tree is?
It's a very, thank you, Allison. Does anyone know how to, let's see if, let's try you back here. You've all had good answers, yes.
So, for example, the stump of a tree, you would count the rings.
Uh-huh.
That's how many years.
You can count the rings of a tree in order to know how old a tree is, but kind of hard to do that when the tree is still standing. So there are ways people do that. There's actually a place, remarkable place in our community called Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. They have a tree ring lab. So they have a way of testing those things even when a tree is alive. They're open once a year to the public in the fall. Any other questions anyone has? Then what we're going to do is I'm going to try this tree. I'm not sure what'll happen, but we're going to drill it and I'll put the tap in. But I'm going to guess that I know two trees over there are going to be more likely to give a sap if this one doesn't. So, and I can't have anyone join me while I do this here, but I'll drill it and we'll see what happens.
This is going to be cool.
You know the other way to know how old the tree is? You can't really read the
This will tell me if I've gone in far enough or not. A little bit more. What I'm looking at when I do this happened to me. I did this with some folks yesterday. The sawdust is quite dry. You know, sometimes you hit a dead spot in the tree, but it's a little bit moist. But I think we're going to do better with a couple of trees that are over behind me. But I figured we'd give this magnificent tree a shot. I'll put the tap in, and then if we don't get anything, we'll take it. I'll take it out in some days. But when I did this yesterday to 2 big trees, the same thing happened. And then I went to 2 trees like we'll visit over there, and the sawdust, not only was it moist, but you could actually see it was starting to drip out. It was actually running down the tree as I tapped it. But we had to give this big old beautiful tree a chance. Sorry. That's not something I can always guarantee. What I'll tell you is I'll be surprised if we don't. And today, remember, it's got to be above freezing in the day and below freezing at night today. And yesterday, truthfully, when I went to, there are 2 trees over there I identified that I think there's a much better chance we're going to meet with success.
So you can tell immediately because there was no immediate flow, right?
Yeah, sometimes it may not be warm enough, because every tree, people often ask, how much sap do you get from one tree? I used to do a whole row of them next to our house. They were very similar, one next to the other. One of them would fill this bucket in a day. The other one would have only that much. And some of them would start to flow right away, and others would take a few minutes. So they're not always the same. Every tree doesn't do the same thing, even though they might look similar size, right in the same area. That's just how it is. Let's see if we can look this. Pick a good spot. Yep, it's moist.
Yeah.
And now, what you have to be sure you do is you can, if your parents are okay with this, you can go one at a time and open your mouth. Don't put your mouth near it. Let it drip down into your mouth. Don't put your mouth on it. Let me get it out of the way. You're okay with parents here?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's dripping.
But it's dripping.
Yeah.
It's really
All right.
You want to try that?
All right, Reedy, let's do it. Or you go first.
But
Make sure you don't touch it with your mouth.
So you're going to have to obviously, yeah.
but then way down below.
Right down.
Exactly.
That's
like
it.
There you
It's like
go.
fun. How's it taste?
I think she's like water.
Like water.
Yeah.
Good, Reedy.
Anyone else?
I like water.
It's pretty cool. You can drink straight from a tree.
That tastes like coconut
That's
water.
really my favorite stuff.
There you go.
That's
Oh, almost one more.
Yeah.
Oh, a little to the right.
What is that?
Oh, wow. You're thirsty, huh?
Good?
It's like water, but it's sweet. Yeah, it's like coconut water.
Let's see. Oh,
That's a very watery
That's
taste.
right, yeah.
It just tastes
Are
like
there any
water.
trees? Bob, are there any trees that have dangerous, poisonous sap?
Some are not good for you. Yeah, I don't know which one.
All right, there, Quinny. How is it? Nice.
Okay, let's see.
Give it a try, yeah.
There are quite a few.
She's hiding
Am I
behind the
the
fur.
only one to go? She's my sister.
All right, Lily, that's enough, honey. Did you get it?
I like it.
Where are you going?
Fourth grade?
Teddy, you want to try it?
Cooper? Cooper?
Here, wait,
All
not
right.
your turn, not yet, Teddy.
Sorry,
Teddy,
sorry,
Teddy did.
sorry, sorry.
Wait your turn, Teddy.
All right.
Wait, Cooper, let me get a pic. That's so cool.
That's
You want to
awesome.
go, Teddy? Go ahead.
Well, let's see if we can get it in the target. Almost.
There you go.
Oh, oh,
You get it?
Got it, you got it.
You get it? Here.
you gotta go. Oh, there you go.
It's like a watermelon. It's like a watermelon.
Wow. Our just like in Hollywood, our maple tapping movie had a happy ending. So we're gonna be able to take questions. Bob Stien is here. You can use the raise hand function. I see there are already a bunch of questions in the chat, so you can leave your questions there. We'll get to those questions. But before we hear from Bob, I'd like to introduce friends of Riverhook board member and the founder of the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust, Allison Crowther.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you all for joining us this evening for this first of, we hope to be many wonderful Experience Riverhook programs. The Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust is proud to support the amazing work of Flying Films New York that will make each Experience Riverhook program accessible to the public. We hope also at some point we may be able to make these programs accessible to schools and other educational institutions as well. I'd like to acknowledge and thank very much board members Marielle Bush, who is a friend of our sons at Boston College, and Robert Lewis III, who was a friend of our sons here in Upper Nyack growing up their whole lives. Marielle, with her husband Rob and their children Jack, Lily, and Teddy, were participants, and Rob Lewis, with his wife Liz and their children Sam, Cooper Wells, and Bo, participated. A bit of history that you all might enjoy is that Rob Lewis's grandfather was purchased and was the developer of the other half of what is now Riverhook from its original location on the farm. It's the strip of property to the north of Riverhook where, and he built the homes, created Hook Mountain Lane and Lewis Drive and built those homes there. So the Lewis family has a lot of history here in Upper Nyack as well. As well as those connections, Vinnie Garrison, who is the owner of, and our videographer, the owner of Flying Films New York, also grew up in Upper Nyack, and Vinnie played lacrosse with Rob and Wells at Nyack High School. He was a bit older. His two children, Reed and Quinn, also participated. So we were thrilled. They were so well behaved, and their excellent questions were rewarded by the taste of the maple sap, which we were thrilled to that happened. And all the adults there were rewarded by this beautiful sight of the children enjoying a gift from nature. So with that, I thank you all, and I would like to introduce my friend and neighbor, Bob Stien.
I'm very happy to be here tonight. I think this is, for me, a magical process, the way that with just a small hole in a tree at the right time of the year, sap comes out. And I know we have some good questions. And Bill, maybe you can just read them out and we'll walk through them quickly. I'll let you kind of guide us through that, if that's okay, from the chat. What I do
Very
want to say very quickly, though, is I just want to express my gratitude and say, Bill, you did an exceptional job organizing this. Allison Crowthers and Paul, and Paul Curley and the rest of the board were just so supportive and so helpful. It really takes a bit to pull even an event like this together. I see, very happy to see Karen Terrapata, who's on with us, and we are on that land because Karen and others who she worked with had the good judgment and move forward, and we then have this wonderful Riverhook Park. Flying Films did an exceptional job. The last comment I'll make is the way I learned all of this was through my buddy Ed Bieber, who started the Nature Place Day Camp, and he was my mentor. And I had a question, Ed, what about this? What about that? That's when I burned quite a few pots more than I have in the last several years. But having said all that, Bill, why don't you lead us through? You did a great job in every way here. So maybe as the moderator, just pick some questions and I'll walk through them with you.
Very good. The first question here, and I have a couple from Diana Katz, is, does taking the sap out weaken the tree?
It's a very good question, because one of the things I mentioned is that a tree really has to be of a certain size. It's all, the way comparison I make is that it's almost like the way we give blood. There's only a certain amount of blood that we can give, and then we're still fine. And with a tree, you can't drill. If a tree is enormous, and it really has to be quite large to put more than one bucket on, but it doesn't hurt the tree if you simply take a modest amount, the bucket that fills up each day that might have a couple of quarts or a gallon, gallon and a half. It depends upon, like I said before, the tree, but it does not hurt the tree. However, during a drought several years ago, when the trees were already stressed and really challenged, I didn't tap really any trees at all, except one that had its roots in a stream. It happened to be growing where it had water that, like most of the other trees, didn't. So you have to use good judgment. If a tree looked like it's been harmed, maybe the tree was hit by a truck or some branches are off the tree and it doesn't look like a healthy tree, I'll leave that tree alone. It's not ready and shouldn't be, sap should not be taken from that tree.
And another question from Diana, does every tree have sap?
I believe, if I remember correctly, Allison, you might have a background as a botanist. You probably know more about all the different trees out there than I do. From tapping the trees, I can tell you, I mentioned a few, but there are many more. Does every tree have sap?
Well, every tree needs the ability to draw water from the soil and up into its leaves, branches, leaves. Yes. So, whether it is of a quality that would be able to turn into sap, that's another question. I think, you had a good selection of trees that could do it.
There are quite a few different trees, but I'm sure I wouldn't want to put a hole in a pine tree and, take this here is, sometimes when we're on a Zoom call, we take a glass to, wet our thirst, to drink a bit. This is maple sap. It looks
Of course it is.
It's the end of the run for this area. It looks just like water. And my two daughters, Gabrielle and Selena, with their playful spirits, would put sap in the glasses when people came over for dinner, and then they'd look to see if people noticed, because it looks just like water. And I did tap a walnut tree this year, and it was quite clear as well. I don't have experience with a ton of other trees. I've just done birch in the past, and it was also very clear.
So while you're sipping maple sap, I'll ask two questions from Christopher James Patsos. What does the term amber mean in reference to syrup? And then he has a follow-up.
There are different grading. There are different grading systems in different areas. Like in one area, fancy might be light amber or grade A. I think they've done some things in different areas to make it more uniform, but it refers to that process I talked about, in the video. It's in the beginning of the run. It's very light, and what they'll do, I've been in sugar houses where they'll literally have like a little box, and they'll have like 3 or 4 different little jars that are of a different color, and you can see the sap you've made, how it matches up to what's in that little, kind of grading box. Your sap will be light amber. It might be grade B, which is darker, and that's at the end of the run. Beginning a lighter color, and then towards the end a darker color, and a more
Right,
robust flavor.
This one might be a little tough for you. From where was the best syrup you've ever tasted?
What I would say is out of the pot in my kitchen. It's like anything that's really fresh. Not that I make better syrup than anyone else, but it's like anything. In this time of the year, Enid is very happy when I don't boil that much anymore, but she happens to like it on vanilla ice cream. And it's just like anything. When vegetables are shipped from 3,000 miles away and sit on the shelf for a couple of days, it's a bit different than when you go out in your own garden and pluck something right off the vine. So I've always enjoyed when we make it fresh, but I've bought a lot of good syrup in different settings.
So this is from Addison Chappelle. What about grading syrup? I think you did a little bit on this, but you see syrup containers grade A, etc. What does that mean? What is the difference?
It's just when it's from the beginning of the run to the end, it goes from very light, like I said, to a much darker color and a much stronger flavor, much more robust, stronger flavor the end of the run has.
Very good. And another question from Diana Katz. It was about the drill. Oh, can you use any drill?
Yeah, the drill really doesn't matter. The truth is, I do the brace and bit because it's sort of a fun old tool, and I have lots of old tools that I like to play with. When I drill about 20 trees, myself around our property here, and actually over at Marydale, I drill some, and I just go over with the Makita, cordless. In 2 seconds, I just drill it, tap it in, and I'm on my way. The brace and bit, it doesn't matter. What does matter, and I don't know that we mentioned this, and it really is important, when you drill that hole, you really better be sure to drill it at a slight incline, because you want gravity working with you and for you. So as it starts to drip, just like a river doesn't run, the water has to flow out of downstream with the river. The same is true with the sap. It has to flow out and have a downward angle so that it, will flow out of the tree.
So those are all the questions that I see currently in the chat. And you might need to help me, Rosemary, because on my screen, I can't see all the participants.
Okay, I see Addison Chappelle was asking how many gallons you collect in a typical year.
It really varies year to year. Some years are really quite different one than the other. There's a gentleman who sells maple syrup at the Nyack Farmers Market. And I often have a sap conversation with him. We'll talk about whether or not it's a good year, because if you don't have that below freezing and above freezing cycle for an extended number of days, you'll have much less in that year. And they'll talk about having a terrible year because the temperature just wasn't such that allowed you to collect sap in the way that you might hope to. I might get, from the trees that I have, it's not uncommon to get 15 gallons in one day. I'll go over with those 5-gallon, water bottle. And with all that snow this year, it was quite challenging. I had to be resourceful because it was kind of difficult. I couldn't drive in to get too close to the trees, to some of them. So I had a strap and I lugged the 5-gallon buckets out of the woods to get it, to my pots and to my friends.
Thank you.
Okay, I see a question Diane Katz was asking, is it too late now to tap a tree?
Here it is. I mean, I see one of the people, I saw Bob Gruber, my son-in-law up in Massachusetts. He's put a couple of buckets out and he texted to me today and he said his buckets are full. He's doing very well. As you go further north, they'll still be tapping for some time. We might be finished just south of here and they're not even beginning in Quebec because it's still below freezing day and night. So right now here, I've started to take my buckets off. I think I saw 8 days from now, one night that's 30 degrees at night. We might not see much at this point. What I usually tell people is in this area, Valentine's Day or President's Day, right in the middle of February is usually when it begins. But that's just very loose, and you can't really count on that. It's really that freeze thaw cycle, which usually is present around that time, but not always. I remember Ed Bieber telling me in the last year or two, when it was much warmer at times, he was tapping some trees, in January, and he was getting sap because it was with that freeze thaw cycle, he was able to do that. But this year, you're out of luck, I think, locally. You'd have to, you have a friend who lives an hour or two north, go visit them or tell them to put a bucket out for you.
And I see one more. Someone is asking, I think Lazar is asking, when was the first time you tapped a tree?
Probably about 25 years ago. It had to be 25 years ago because Selena, my younger daughter, is 30 now. And I can remember bringing her kindergarten class to our house. And it was like a class trip with Bob. We went out and tapped a few trees, in the yard. And so I would say, right around 25 years, something like that.
Well, Bob, thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity, for the knowledge you share, for your infectious enthusiasm. A lot of folks are recipients of your containers of maple sap, and if anybody ever really wants to see one of his secret talents, he's a wonderful sculptor of the natural environment. He really has so much to offer and is constantly willing to share with his neighbors. So thank you for all you do, and especially what you do for the land that we all share. Thank you so much, Bob.
No, thank you. And I will say, if people, you're out of luck for this year, it's just passed, but I will tell you that there are two companies where I get my supplies from. One is a Leader Evaporator, another is Bascom, Bascom. And they not only will sell the buckets, the spouts, and the rest. I get their catalog each year, but they're also very knowledgeable. I mean, obviously, as they sell these things, they're happy to tell you more about how you can do this. There seem to be YouTubes for everything that one could possibly want to know about. So, while I've shared what I have today, I know I've looked at a number of YouTube. Sometimes some are more helpful than others. But if people want to do this, I'd suggest next January, make a note in your calendar, reach out to those few companies that I mentioned, because you can get the taps and the buckets and the rest from them. Some people, in one of the YouTubes that I saw the other day, someone literally took simply a, food grade 5-gallon container, maybe from something that was delivered to a bakery or a restaurant, and they just drilled a hole in it. That was their sap bucket. And they just hung that off of the spout. So I would encourage people to, make sure they pay attention to a lot of things we mentioned today if they're going to do it, so they don't use a tree that's too small. But I would think that this would be something a lot of people could have fun with next year. So things like this are done, by the way. This didn't come up, so far tonight, all over the world. In Vermont, maple syrup is from the Northeast primarily, and then I mentioned big leaf out west. But I'll tell you, if you went online, you'd find that in Europe, they not only tap birch trees in Alaska and in Russia, but they do all kinds of things with the sap. I talked about drinking it and about making syrup, but there are all kinds of things for the skin. They use them, they take baths in the sap and have these lotions that they put on their bodies. And so there's a whole bunch more one can learn. Today we talked about maple sap, make it into syrup, but there's so much more that is done with sap all over the world in these areas that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I wondered, does anyone else have any other questions? Is there anything else that we might tell anyone as we're winding down now?
I see someone was asking about, they heard Bascom as one of the places to get supplies. What was the other place?
A Leader,
that you mentioned?
Leader, Leader Evaporator. They both have websites, and they'll they have catalogs. But I just go online and talk with them, and then that's where I buy my spouts and buckets and the rest. I have, by the way, I will say this: a lot of the things that I have that are older, just like they've learned they can make a smaller hole. Some of the older buckets, frankly, they were soldered with lead solder. They're maybe charming old buckets, but they're not the buckets today are not sold like that have that, even the metal buckets. But I find that the plastic buckets are just fine, and they're much less money. And besides that, for certain saps, when you go to do this, you cannot and should not use a metal bucket, I believe, for birch. There's something about something in the birch sap that somehow interacts with the the metal galvanized buckets in a way that they say you shouldn't do that. You should use plastic. So we're just about at the end of our time. If there are no
Thank
other
you.
questions, Bill, I'll stop and go to you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Well, this was wonderful. But to say a few final words, I'd like to introduce Paul J. Curley, who is the president and one of the founders of Friends of Riverhook.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks everyone for joining tonight. I really enjoyed that. I really learned a lot from that program. And although I think my favorite part was the kids drinking the sap, that just really brought a smile to my face. So I just want to say thanks to Nyack Library for another fantastic collaboration. Thanks to Bob for sharing his knowledge and his passion. And thanks to the Wells Crowther Charitable Trust for making the video production possible. And that was really great work. It was just a great video from Flying Film New York. And I'm happy to say we have several more of these planned in the future. So it's very exciting. If you haven't been to Riverhook, I invite you to stop by and see it in person. I also invite you to check out and visit our website, riverhook.org. It'll just put the website name up there. Stop by the website. You can see a design vision that we hope for the future of the preserve, which was inspired by 2 years of discussion with the community. Also on the site, you can find our newest initiative, which is called Riverhook Bookshelf. And this will be an ongoing exchange of book recommendations, many of which are related to the environment or themes, similar themes. And we hope that will culminate in discussions eventually in person. So please check out the website. And lastly, I hope you will consider supporting our work by making a contribution on our donation page at riverhook.org. So thank you, everyone who helped make this such a fascinating presentation. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and good night.
Bill, if I could say, thank you, Paul. If I could say just in closing that, one of the co-sponsors, the Friends of Rock and Lake and Hook Mountain, is really an organization to know something about as well. We have David Neal as our president and Liz Coe. David Neal is our head of the board. Liz Coe is our president. And, I also encourage you to look at our website. Some of the things we've been involved in that we're doing is we have a fabulous program with the Nyack School District that's being expanded to other school districts called the Outdoor Science Alliance, where children will hopefully be inspired to engage yet more outdoors, doing things that they might do. You can see more about it on our website. We also have a fabulous kiosk that a scout, Kevin Saum, built at the beginning of the river trail at Hook Mountain. That was something our friends group did, and there'll be fabulous and really good information there that people will look forward to seeing not too far in the not too distant future. And we're very excited to say that later this spring or early summer, we don't have an exact date, a trail that the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, the long distance trail crew with other New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, is building a fabulous trail that will be open. There'll be an announcement. It'll be open. It's not something to go into now, but you'll find that there'll be this ceremony where we'll be honoring all who helped to create that. And that was also a program that the Friends of Rockland Lake and Hook Mountain did a lot of work to, we helped, frankly, to acquire the 30 acres from the Marydell sisters to add it to the park so that trail could go in. And we also would welcome donations and ask you to look at our website and see what we're up to there. We are at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to stop. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Please experience Riverhook. Come on down.
Great park, and thank you so much to this program tonight.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Rosemary. Thanks, Nyack Library.
Bye.
Bye.